Hello there, and here we are in a new lesson. What we're going to be doing in this one is basically set up our player. Our player we will be covering it in different lessons. For example, this one we are just going to be setting it up, basically creating the different nodes. And then, well, in different lessons we will be even modifying the nodes that we create in this one. And we will start coding it by parts because the code is, let's say, the most complex part of the player, the movement, the animation, etc. So we are going to be breaking it down in different lessons. Okay, so let's start with the setup, that it is the easiest. So for our player, first of all, when wanting to choose which node to use for a player, there are a bunch of things that we have to consider. First of all, if we erase here the search bar information and we open here the node 2D tab, in collision object to this, and you open here physics bodies to this, and you open here static bodies to this, well, you have here, let's actually close this one. So we have four main types of bodies in Godot: static bodies, characters bodies, rigid bodies to this, and areas to this. So there are tons of differences and similarities between all these bodies, so it is quite difficult to cover them in just one lesson. So I will try to give you a general view into these nodes. So the static body, actually the description here is quite accurate. Basically it's a body that can be moved by external forces. You will usually use static bodies for walls, for example, in your game. If you want to create some kind of wall or a roof or some other kinds of body that isn't going to be moving, well, that is the place where, that is the situation in which you will use a static body 2D. Then let me explain here the area 2D. Basically the area 2D will create a space, a region that will emit some signals related to the collisions. Basically we are going to be able to detect the collisions that happen in that body. For example, if we have a football goal and we want to detect if the ball has touched the line of the goal, and we want to detect that there has been a goal and therefore we want to increase the score, we would use just an area 2D. So areas are usually used to literally have an area, a region, and a specific space that the only thing that we want to do is to detect collisions. And areas can also be moving around, okay? And the main difference with rigid bodies and character bodies to this are the methods that we can use with them. Areas to this don't really have a lot of methods related to the movement. As I told you, they are meant to just be a region in which you can detect collisions, so it's used for pretty basic player movements that, for example, do not have some kind of jumping. You will use areas to this for players that you just want to move around without any kind of physics, jump, etc. So let's say that two more complex bodies here are rigid bodies and character bodies to this. Rigid bodies, as I told you, have the peculiarity that are used for physics behaviors. So as I told you, they have gravity. In rigid bodies you can also apply impulses, you can apply forces. So rigid bodies are quite complex in a way. And on the other hand, also character bodies are like the middle point between an area 2D and a rigid body, because they have some functions or similar functions between them related to the physics and to movements and to collisions, but they don't have more complex functions in terms of forces, impulses, etc. Okay, so in this course you could literally use any of these three, because these three can move and detect collisions. But the most appropriate actual body for this game would actually be a rigid body 2D because they have physics, and we are going to be able to have gravity, a built-in gravity and built-in physics in Godot. However, specifically for this course, I will stick to character body 2D because Godot physics are a little bit, let's say that complicated to get to work right, and sometimes it is even easier and more direct to just code our own physics when we want some kind of pretty simple behavior related to physics. If we want to have more advanced things, as I told you, with impulses, with forces, of course rigid bodies are going to be the best fit. But as here the only thing related to physics that we want to include is gravity and a jump, the easiest one to go for is character body. Okay, so I know it is a lot to process in just 5-6 minutes, but I hope that now with these explanations it is a little bit more clearer. Godot has an amazing documentation where you can take a look at how to use rigid bodies, in which cases you can use rigid bodies. There is also information about areas to this and literally any other kinds of body that you can think of. So feel free, if you really want to look further into more explanations, into deeper explanations, go to the documentation, because as you can see it is super well explained with some code examples. So feel free to also use this tool. So as a result, let's just go to use our character body 2D. And I will rename it to player. I will have here a warning that I need to have a collision shape, so let's add it right away. And I will have here other warning that my collision shape doesn't have a shape defined. Before defining the shape, let's say the sprite. Okay, and for the sprite, of course, let's quick load my player. As it is pixel art, remember to change the filter from inherit to nearest, as we did it with our background and our tile map. And here, as you can see, it is in a kind of a sprite sheet. So in the future, we are going to have some animations for our player using these frames, okay? But right now, we don't really want to animate it, so let's just turn on the region. And this will allow us to edit it. And basically, instead of having 3 different images, let's just make this a little bit smaller, like this. Okay, and with this, as you can see, I will only have my first frame of the animation. Okay, or you can even go to the animation, and here horizontal frames. H stands for horizontal, and here we have 1, 2, and 3, and here we have like 2 empty spaces. I don't know why the image comes like that, so let's just select that horizontal frames. We have 5, okay, and there we have it. And even if we change here the frame, for example, let's change here to 1, 2, well, as you can see, the image will start moving a little bit. But well, we will do that later on with other node that it is more specific in order to animate it. But well, this will just give us the basis that we need for the project. So finally, the shape that I will choose is just a rectangle shape. Let me change the other here so that we can see the collision shape clearer. And I will just adapt it perfectly. Let's try it to our player. But well, finally, as you can see, it is super small. So I will just give it here on the character body a scale of 4. And by the way, I am scaling it in my character body because it is the root node. Because here, if I want to scale it in on my sprite, as you can see, it will only scale in the sprite. So just to scale in everything, it is usually done on the root node because of that. So for example, let's drag and drop this thing over here, and if we click play, as you can see, there we have our player. Okay, and well, in the future lessons we will actually start animating it. But before doing that, let's save it as a scene, as we did with our background. I'm gonna name it player, and here inside the scenes, let's save it. So see you in our next lesson. Hello there and welcome to a new lesson. What we are going to be creating today is going to be basically our player movement. We will have some different mechanics within our player movement, such as the movement itself, the animations, the sprites flipping, etc. So we will build this mechanic in a variety of lessons, okay? So to begin with, let's open up the player scene by just clicking over here to open it on the editor, the scene that we created in our last lesson. Remember that we are going to have our player created in a different scene in order to then be able to reuse this player into our second player, okay, in order to have the local multiplayer. So let's basically select our player over here, and with this button we are going to be able to attach a new script. Here make sure that you're selecting object empty template basically, and over here on the path, as you can see, it is going to be saved inside of our scenes, and well, it shouldn't be saved inside of our scenes, it should be inside of our scripts. So let's select here the scripts, click here open, and here just create, okay? Sounds good. So basically here we are going to be able to start coding our player, and to begin with this we will have to declare some variables, okay? The first variable that we will need is our movement speed, okay, and this is going to be an integer, okay? That's why we are writing the variable this way, because we want to define that it's going to be an integer, basically 0, 1, 2, 3, etc., whole numbers. And in this case I will set it to 600, okay? Then later on you're gonna be able to modify this movement speed as you want. I will also have a jump force, and I will assign a value of 1000. I will also need a value of gravity. Remember that we are going to be coding the gravity ourselves, as we are using a character body that doesn't have by default physics behaviors. So we will need to define our gravity force as well. So in this case I will just assign a value of 2800. And finally I will also be having a float called direction that will have no value, because then no initial value, I mean, because then in the code we will be modifying this direction to basically define if our player is going to be moving left or right depending on the input that we provide. So talking about inputs, what we are going to do right now is to go to our project and then project settings, and here select input map, and here we are going to create our different input actions to be able to move our player. So here it is quite simple to understand it. Here we basically type the action name, so let's for example call it move left, like this, then click enter, okay? And over here you can just add any kind of action. And here as you can see, it is currently listening for input. So if I click here any key on my keyboard, for example, I know I press the P, well, it's going to detect the P over here, and if I click OK, this action of move left is going to be called when I press the P. So I don't really want that key to be, I actually, in order to move left, I want to move with the A, okay? And let's just finish up adding the other actions that we will need, that are basically move right, okay? And then here, in order to move right, I want to use the D, okay? And I also want to jump, so let's add it over here, and to jump I will be using the W, okay? So later on we will get back to the input map, because throughout the course we will be adding some other actions, such as with our controller or joypad, Also we have some other actions that are missing right now that we aren't actually going to be adding it right now. For example, the shooting. But well, with these three actions we are going to be able to begin with creating the player movement. Okay, so the first thing that I want to create is the physics process function, and I will write here pass so that I don't get this error. I'm going to be using the physics process function because, as I told you, as we are going to be handling gravity on our end without actually using the built-in gravity that Godot provides, we will have to use the physics process instead of the normal process, okay? Because we are going to be doing things related to physics. Okay, so we have to apply this gravity. And to apply this gravity, it is quite simple. We want to detect if we aren't on the floor, we want to apply some kind of force to our player. And to check if we aren't on the floor, because of course, gravity on real life, if the player is on top of some kind of object, the player itself doesn't have gravity because it is already in some kind of surface. But on the other hand, if the player isn't on the floor, isn't on some kind of platform, it should be falling down as if it had gravity. That's how it works in real life. So to check that, it is super simple here in Godot and using the character body, because we have a function that will actually provide us directly with this value, and basically we can check here if not is on floor. Okay, as you can see, it is super simple. And basically, if we aren't on the floor, we want to apply some kind of force. So right now, let's just write here pass so that we don't get any error. And let's say here a deeper look into the different options that we have over here. Unfortunately, here we can't really set what I wanted to show you in the inspector, so let's do it by code. So what I want to do here on the floor is to apply a velocity in the y-axis. Why? Because here in Godot, if we want to move down, as we want here to apply some gravity down as in real life, let's move the player down, and as you can see here on the y-axis, the value increases as I go down, so we have to increase this y value. And here characters' bodies have velocity. Okay, so here if, for example, in spite of our condition, okay, if I set here, for example, velocity dot x, okay, plus equals delta times movement speed, okay, and then finally I call here move and slide, that it is the function that if we click, if we press Control and then click it, we can see a lot of documentation about this, but this is basically to update the velocity, to move the body depending on the velocity that we give it, okay, that we update. And if we do this, as you can see, we start moving, okay. So that's just for you to correctly understand this. So having that in count, in order to apply this gravity, it is quite simple, because we just have to grab the velocity.y because we want to move on the y-axis. And then over here, we are going to be increasing this value by gravity, okay, because we want to move down, okay, that's why we are increasing as I showed you. And then we will also multiply it by delta. And we are multiplying this by delta in order to be able to move this object at the same speed, at the same frame rate. So that is what delta makes sure that happens, okay. This is the first step in our player movement, so we will really get into creating all the rest systems that we have to create in our player movement in the following lessons. Hi there and welcome to a new lesson. Today we're basically going to continue creating our player movement, and let's continue exactly where we left off in our previous lesson, okay? So basically we were detecting with the character body built-in method if we were on the floor, And basically, if we weren't on the floor, we would change the velocity of the body. Okay, we would increase the y, because here in Godot, if you increase the y, it is when we go down. That's why we are increasing it. And well, actually, on the other hand, if we decrease this value, we would be going up. So it would be like the opposite of gravity, actually, to have the opposite real life value of gravity if we decreased it. Okay, and then basically we are just multiplying this value by delta to keep it the same in different frame rates. Okay, so now if we just outside of our if condition, we call here move and slide. As I told you, this is a method that is also built in inside of the character body. And here, as you can see, moves the body based on velocity. In short, it is basically the function that we need to call in the process, or physics process in this case, as we want to handle physics. And if we want to move the body based on the velocity. Okay, so it is quite simple to understand if we just stick to that. So once we do this and we go to the main scene, for example, and let's move the player to a place that it would collide with our platform. So make sure that you're moving it somewhere like this, so that we can see how the player falls down. As you can see, there the player is on our platform and the gravity was applied correctly. Okay, so like this, with just 2 lines of code, well actually 3, we are able to have our own gravity system, and we have a lot of control over this system. Because, for example, as I told you, if we decrease here the velocity and we play again, it will go up. Okay, you can also decrease or increase the gravity. You can do literally anything that you want. You have plain control. Now, in order to jump, it is a little bit contrary to what we did here. Okay, so first of all, before actually changing the velocity, what we have to do is that we should detect if we are pressing some kind of key or actually input action that we created here, jump. And if it is, okay, we are basically going to be changing here the velocity.y. Okay, and basically as we want to go up, we are going to be decreasing it. So let's create other condition over here, and we're going to be checking if input dot is action. And as you can see here, in terms of actions pressed, we have 2 methods: action pressed and action just pressed. Action pressed, okay, the first method, would be called every time we press and held down the key. So for example, let's do a quick test, because this is simpler to explain if you just see the result. So if input dot is action pressed jump, I will just print here jump. Okay, and you will see what happens. So I will click here the W, and as you can see, it keeps printing. Okay, so it is quite simple to understand. And on the other hand, if we only call just pressed, the event is only going to be triggered once. Okay, when we actually start clicking the action, when the action starts. So basically it is going to be called just one time when we press it, and on the other hand, action pressed is going to be called at every time that the action is happening. So in this case, when it comes to detecting the jump, we only want to jump when we click once. Okay, we don't really want to be calling this method like every time we are holding down our jump action. Okay, so basically here, if our input action is action just press the jump, what we want to do is to again grab our velocity.y, and here I wanted to make it equal to the negative value of jump force. So remember that here in our variable we assigned a value of 1000, so this is a positive number. And what I want to do here is to actually move up, and as I want to move up, okay, take a look at here, I have to decrease my y value if I want to go up. Okay, that is why here I am making it equal to the opposite of this value. Or if it is simpler for you to understand this, you can just move this symbol over here, okay, and it will work the same. Okay, but for me at least it is clearer if I keep it over here. So now if we play in our main scene, okay, and we press the W, as you can see, our player, yes, only jumps once, but if we are on the air, and well, basically we can jump as much as we want, even though we aren't on the floor. And well, we can basically check if not only we are pressing this key, but also if we are on floor, then if both conditions are true, we want to jump. And that's exactly how it works in real life. You can't really jump if you aren't on the floor, okay? So I think that this method, it is quite cool because you can really understand everything by just reading the function. So if we are pressing the jump action and is on floor, only then we want to be able to jump. Okay, now let's try this again. And as you can see, even though I am spamming W, I can only jump, or well, the jump only takes effect when I am colliding with the floor. Okay, and doing like this, we have successfully integrated the jumps into our game. Hello there and welcome to a new lesson. We're going to continue on our player movement. We are now able not only to have our gravity, but also to jump, okay? So now we have to add the movement with the keys, basically the movements left and movement right. So in order to add it, it's a little bit more complex than just these ones, okay? But it is easy as well, okay? So the first thing that we have to do over here is that remember that here we have a direction variable, and we will actually use this direction variable right now. And basically we will assign over here the value of input dot get axis, okay, and basically what we want to do here, if we hold down Control and then click over here, we're going to have here what this method does. Get axis input by specifying two actions, one negative and one positive. This is a shorthand for writing input dot get action strength positive action minus input dot get action strength negative action. Okay, so basically what this is going to do is to calculate the difference between two inputs that we write and return the value of it. Okay, so why are we going to be using this value? Okay, because we want to calculate the difference between the strength of our move left action and our move right, basically the strength with which we are pressing them. So again, this is quite more simpler to understand for you if we just try it out. So as I told you, here on the get axis, if we come back here to the documentation, we have a negative action and a positive action. If we go here to the player again, in Godot you decrease going to the left, okay, as you can see over here, and you increase the X by going to the right. This means that our negative action would be moving left and our positive action would be moving right. So what I'm going to write over here is just move left because it is our negative action, and then over here after the comma our positive action, which is move right. Now let's actually print this value out so that you're going to be able to understand this much better, I think. Let's go to our main scene, and also, well, remember to save here the changes, and let's preview our scene. Well, as you can see right now it is just 0. However, if we click, I will hold down D right now, and when I hold down D, as you can see, I have 1 over there. Okay, I'm not pressing D anymore, that's why I'm having 0. Why? Because there is no difference between move left and right in terms of strength, okay, because I'm pressing none of them. And then if I press the left key, as you can see I have -1, okay? Because we have said that our move left would be our negative value, that's why it would return -1 negative, and we have set our move right to be our positive value, that's why it's returning 1. So it's like a more handy method that Godot provides in order to have player movement, okay? So having encountered the fact that if we are in 0, it means that we aren't moving. If our direction is equal to 1, we are moving to the right, and if direction is equal to -1, we are moving left. We can actually create the system quite easily. So basically here, let's check. So we have to check if there is some kind of value inside of our direction. So basically we would say just if direction, okay? And if direction would just mean, is there any value inside of our variable? Basically, is it either left direction or right direction? Are we moving? Would that be? We can again print something out and you will realize that indeed that is what is happening. So for example, let's print over here, we are moving. And as you can see here, I'm not having anything printed as I am not pressing some key, but if I press any key, as you can see, I'm getting this message printed out, okay? So basically, if we are moving, because there is something inside of this direction variable, what I want to do is to again modify the velocity. And in this case, I want to modify my velocity.x as movement, as horizontal movement, happens on the x, okay, of the object. So the velocity x in this case is going to be equal to our direction times movement speed. Okay, basically we are also adding the direction over here because it is going to be positive or negative depending on if we are moving left or right, as I explained a second ago. So it would make the velocity either negative or positive, okay, to move left or right. And finally we are just multiplying that value by movement speed, just to have some kind of speed, because if not our speed would be 1 or -1, and that isn't a lot of speed. We wouldn't actually see that 1 of speed because it is so slow that it would be quite difficult for us to actually spot that difference in our screen. And that's why we are using movement speed that, as you can see, is 600 right now. Now let's go back to our main scene, and if we want to run the scene and we press any key, as you can see, the player like continues its own way, even though I only pressed the key like once. And that is happening because the velocity x doesn't, like, it is not being reset, okay? So we actually have to reset this velocity once we aren't pressing anything, okay? So to do that, basically, remember that here we're checking if we are moving, and here if we are not moving, what we are going to do, instead of just resetting the velocity to be 0, we are just gonna set here a value of move toward, okay, move toward, because we want to give it some kind of dynamism, because if we just reset it harshly to 0, it is going to be like super, it's not gonna be smooth. So if we want to smooth this out, it is quite simple. We have to define from what value to what value we want to move toward, and that is the value that we want to move from our velocity.x to 0. Okay, and the delta over here is going to be basically the velocity at which we want this to happen, and we already have the movement speed, okay? So that is why we will be using that again. And now if you come back to the main scene and run it again, as you can see now we do have player movement with a jump, and we can also move left and right accordingly. There are still some issues with the sprite flipping, okay, that it should flip if we are moving left, but that is something that we will be adding on our next lesson. Hello there and welcome to a new lesson. What we're going to be creating in this one is basically the movement, okay, for the players, okay? Basically the actual local multiplayer logic, because right now we do have 2 players, but they are moving at the same time with the same input actions. So actually for this course we are going to be providing two ways of creating this local multiplayer. The first one that I'm going to be explaining right here is basically having this local multiplayer with the same keyboard. Basically one player will move with the A, D, W and would shoot with the left mouse button, and the other one will shoot with the will move with the arrow keys and shoot with the enter key. But basically actually the good idea of having a local multiplayer game is to avoid having a messy input map with tons of different input actions, because if you wanted to have, for example, I don't know, 4 players in the same local multiplayer, you had to have 4 different inputs, break the keyboard in 4 sections. So that is something that in an actual local multiplayer game doesn't happen. Why? Because most local multiplayer games are played with a controller, okay? So well, if you do not have a controller, I will be showing you this way of just using the keyboard, that it is super simple. So let's start right away. So first of all, you will have to choose which way you are going to be using, okay? Because you aren't actually going to be able to set up the project to use both at the same time. You will have to make a choice here. Or you can even experiment with both, because the process that we are going to be following, it is quite simple. So if you now want to experiment playing on the keyboard and then you do have a controller, I want to also experiment playing with the controller, you're going to be able by just reverting the steps, okay? Because it is super simple. So right now, if you really want to use only your keyboard, okay, watch this lesson. Or on the other hand, if you do have a controller and want to use that controller instead of breaking the keyboard into 2 sections, just skip this lesson and go directly to the other one. So if you stick to this lesson, let's get started. So first of all, I'm gonna rename my input actions to just have here 1, because this will be the actions that are going to be used by the player 1. And then I will simply just add the new actions, okay, with basically the same name, but with the number 2 over there. Then we're going to be using this 1 or 2 with the player index to actually use these input actions. And now shoot 2, okay? So here it is quite simple to actually map this. Because to the move left, I'm just going to press here the left arrow. Okay, have it left, okay. Then to move right, I'm going to use my right key. To jump, I will just use my up key. And finally, to shoot, as I told you, I'm going to use my enter, okay. So that I have mapped my actions correctly. Now we do have here a problem, because if we want to play over here, well, none of them work, and we are also having tons of errors over here, because well, here the actions don't exist anymore. We don't anymore have just shoot, for example. We have either shoot 2 or shoot 1. So what is missing over here in all of these are our player index, okay. So to add it, it is super simple. We're just going to add here plus str player index. We are adding here a str because our player index is an integer, and here we must use strings. So we are just going to copy here this line, paste it also here, here, and here as well, okay. And let's actually erase here these extra spaces that were created, okay. And I think I have mapped everything correctly. So yes, everything is working fine. I can move with AW, okay, on this one, and if I click, I can shoot, and here with the arrow keys I can move, and with the enter I can shoot. So basically with this, 2 people would be ready to play in the same keyboard. Even if you are actually going to be using this, I recommend that the first person doesn't shoot with the left mouse button. Here you could use something like the spacebar, for example, or you could even map the 2 options at the same time, so that actually you will be able to only be using your keyboard, okay, and not using the mouse, okay. But as I told you, this is super customizable to your needs, okay. So this is really what the only thing that you would need to have local multiplayer with your keyboard, okay. But actually now as I'm going to be showing you how to create this system but with the plugin, okay, and to be able to also use controllers without having to create extra input actions, because as I told you, for sure here for the player 2 actions I could just directly add here some kind of joypad buttons and that would work. But the idea of local multiplayer is to avoid having messy input maps, okay, because they aren't efficient. As you saw, we have to create brand new actions, we have to assign them here, so it's not super accurate. And also if, for example, here we map these actions to use the joypad buttons and we have 3 joypads connected, we are going to have the same problem as we used to have before this lesson, where multiple players moved with the same input, okay. So that's also the plugin will be there helping us actually use the correct device for the correct player, okay. So that is something that we're going to be doing in our following lesson, okay. But now just to keep things current, I'm just going to come back to the normal, let's say, input actions, not to the normal input actions but to the ones that would be used in the case that you also want to use controller with the local multiplayer plugin that we are going to integrating. So here, as you can see, I think that I have been able to came back to as it used to be. Okay, so basically in our following lesson we are going to be including this add-on that will allow us to have this local multiplayer in a much easier way, and also will allow us to use the joypads, okay. So see you in our following lesson. Hello there and welcome to a new lesson. Basically in this one we are going to install the plugin about local multiplayer that will allow us to actually have a lot of players with different controllers, okay. So we're actually going to be using an add-on because Godot doesn't really provide a built-in way of doing this. That is why we are going to use an add-on. So basically you're going to go to the Godot engine assets library, okay. I'm going to maximize this so that we can see it a little bit more clear, and over here we are just going to look for multiplayer input, okay, and here you're going to find this asset, okay. This add-on provides 2 simple APIs for using normal input actions but spread out across a keyboard player and up to 8 joypad players. This add-on handles multiple devices automatically, so you can keep your input map clean and maintainable. That is what I was telling you about, that this thing will actually help us not to create a lot of input actions different for every device, for every controller, for every player that we want to have. First of all, here, besides the download button, here, let's click here where it says view files, okay. And here the good thing about this is that we do have an installation guide, also a setup guide with everything that we need. So even though I'm going to be explaining everything, of course everything that I explain is based on this. So if you have more questions about this, or you just want to read here like a text tutorial, you can also do that as well. So I really recommend you to anyway take a look at this, because there is more information that maybe it is helpful for you. For example, this thing about Y2 APIs, more kind of advanced information you're going to be able to find over here, okay. So right now I'm going to click here where it says download, okay, and as you can see I will have it over here. So now with this, let's start to actually import this. So basically it actually tells us how to install this into our project. Download the add-ons /multiplayer input directory into your project. So basically let's select here our zip file, right click it, select here WinRAR and extract it. Well, basically you will have here to extract it. It may depend on your operating system, the applications that you have installed in order to extract the files, but well, probably you already have installed WinRAR or some other similar piece of software, okay. So now we are going to have this folder over here, and as you can see here we have the add-ons folder, okay. So you can either here move this folder, this complete folder to the project, or you can move this one, okay. It's going to work exactly the same way. And you can also see that the add-on, it is quite simple, it doesn't contain a bunch of things. And also the good thing about this is that it does provide a demo, as you can see. So basically if you actually open this folder into a Godot project as any other project, you're going to be able to have here a demo scene and a demo player and a demo script. So we are actually going to be able to even dig deeper into how this works, okay? But anyway, we are actually going to be integrating this into our project, so you don't really have to investigate how to integrate this add-on on your own, okay? But well, anyway, if you just want to dig deeper into other demo, you can do it. So let's just select here our add-ons folder, and we are going to either copy it or cut it, okay, to our project folder. Basically, here it is. I'm going to paste these files over here, and I have them add-ons. Then when you come back to Godot, we're going to have just some kind of errors because we have just imported something outside of Godot, let's say. And now here, as you can see, if we follow the guide, in project settings, plugin, find the multiplayer input add-on and click the enable checkbox. So let's exactly do that. We're going to go to the project settings, and here in plugins we have multiplayer input. Let's just enable this and close it, okay? And there we are going to have our multiplayer input. And basically here the last step would be to update our input code in order to use this new multiplayer input plugin, okay? And that is exactly what we are going to be doing in our following lesson. Hello there and welcome to a new lesson. Basically in this one we are going to continue setting up our multiplayer input plugin. Again, we are just going to be following the official repository. So basically, in order to set up our actions, we have to set them in our input map, just like a normal single player game. You can completely ignore the device setting in the input manager because the multiplayer input singleton handles those automatically. Set up both your keyboard and trackpad events on all your actions. Behind the scenes, when the multiplayer input singleton loads and when joypads connect, it will duplicate all your action maps and assign them to the correct device. This allows you to keep a clean list in your input map in the editor and also have it automatically work how you want with multiple players, okay? Basically, this saves a lot of time and a lot of code that we should be handling on our end. Basically, this is going to be doing everything super easily and more efficient. So the first thing that we have to do is to modify a little bit our input map. Basically, we're going to go to a project settings, and then here we are going to click on input map. Here, as I told you, the good thing about this is that we don't really have to create any new actions. We only have to add here the corresponding actions inside of our existing input actions. So go ahead and connect your controller to your PC using the USB cable, and let's start to assign the different input actions. Basically, in order to move left, I'm just going to move my left lever to the right, to the left, okay? Basically, left stick left, okay? And that's going to work. Here, do not change the device or anything like that. That's going to be handled by our add-on. And here on the move right, let's do the same thing, but move it to the right, okay? Only move it one time, okay? Do not try to move it more times or anything like that, because if not, maybe you assign other action. And also read here that you are indeed detecting this correctly. Basically, left stick right, that is correct. In order to jump, I'm just going to be using the A in my Xbox controller, or also here it's going to be cross in Sony or B in Nintendo. Basically, Sony would be in PlayStation. And finally, in order to shoot, in my case, I'm going to use B. That's going to be the circle in Sony or in PlayStation actually, and A for Nintendo, okay? But well, actually, the controller is not going to work unless we actually set this up. So let's go to our player script, and here we will have to change some little things in order to actually make this work correctly. Here again in the documentation, it is quite straightforward and simple to understand what we have to do. So basically, instead of using this, what we are going to be using is this other line of code. Instead of calling here the input base class of Godot, we will have to call the multiplayer input class. That is the class that, well, we have just imported using the add-on. The name of the function is the exact same one. For example, is action press, is action just press, etc. But then, for example, here we do have a new argument that is device. And here actually we do have to set device ourselves, okay? So here it is also quite well explained what device is. In a lot of the built-in input functions, there is a device parameter. It is an integer that uniquely identifies a joypad. Device 0 is the first joypad and device 7 is the 8th joypad, etc. Additionally, for all multiplayer input functions, -1 represents the player using the keyboard and mouse. So here we have quite an important thing. If we want to use the keyboard and the mouse, we will have to set this device parameter to be -1. And if we want to use the first joypad, the device is going to be 0, okay? So basically here, if we come back here to Godot, we're going to have this device argument here as just again an export variable. So let's create it over here. I will again just create it as an export variable so that I can easily assign it in the inspector, okay? And also, of course, it's going to be an integer because this is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, -1, etc. So remember that -1, the device -1 is actually going to be using the keyboard and the mouse, okay? So here I want my player 1 to only be able to move with the keyboard and the mouse. So here on device, I will just write -1. And then my player 2, the device is just going to be 0. Because remember here that device 0 is the first joypad and I will only have one joypad connected. And well, and here, if you want to check again, -1 represents the player using the keyboard and mouse, okay? So everything is going to be working just fine. However, we still have to change all the input actions from this to this and actually use the device parameter. So again, that is quite simple to actually do. Because here we will come back again to the script, and here, well, here I have input, but well, instead of input, here is going to be multiplayer input, okay? And here before our input action name, as you can see, actually here you will receive a warning. It's going to tell us that too few arguments for each action just pressed, because it was expecting 2 arguments instead of just 1. So here I will just write here device followed by a comma, okay? And device is going to be this value over here. So let's do the same thing here with the jump. I will just use here multiplayer input, and here before the jump we're going to write device comma and then leave an empty space over there. Here it's when we are assigning the direction, it's going to be the exact same thing, multiplayer input, and then here also we are going to have to give it the corresponding directions, the corresponding devices. So device here and device over there. But actually here the device, we only have it to give it once at the beginning, okay? So with just this device is going to be working just well. And let's check if we do have some other input action over here, but well, we don't. Now make sure that you have your controller connected to your computer using the USB cable. And well, here if you actually try to play, you will probably receive this error, okay? Because basically here the plugin wouldn't be able to actually detect the controller, and here it is quite simple, the explanation. We are here checking on the physics process for these input actions, and well, this function is being called like all the time at all frames. So we don't actually give Godot like some time to actually detect our controller, okay? So Godot has to take some milliseconds in order to detect the controller, and here when we start the game right away we are requesting Godot to use the controller. That is why as soon as we try to play, we get this error because Godot isn't able to recognize our controller because it needs some time. So a solution that I found that works is here using just process delta instead of physics process delta. Here, as you can see, I'm using here my keyboard to move, okay, and here now I will grab my controller, and as you can see, I'm able to move everything as it should, okay. There the bullets weren't working fine because here I think that yes, I didn't change the player index because I was trying out some things. So basically right now we are just going to be leaving here process because it is something a little bit weird. But if you, for example, actually start the game in other scene, okay, let's say that you have here an empty scene with the play button, and from this scene you go to the main scene, even with the physics process here, it works. But if you start right away at the main scene with physics process, Godot doesn't have enough time to detect the controller. From now on, let's just keep process, then when we have our menu, we'll change this to physics process, because as you can see, the result that we have with the physics, the movement and everything, it is quite similar, okay? So there isn't like such a huge problem if here we use process or physics process, okay? So with this, basically our input is now completed, just that more at the end of the course, when we do have a menu, we will come back to here and change this from process to physics process, okay? But well, in the meantime, see you in our next lesson.